Millionaire CEO mocked the waitress for investment advice. Her first sentence stopped him cold. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. James Anderson sat at his usual table in the exclusive La Belle Époque, a high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of Manhattan. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, renowned for his sharp mind, ruthless business strategies, and an ego that matched his wealth. As he scrolled through his phone, his mind was elsewhere, focused on the latest acquisition his company was finalizing. But something caught his eye. It was Emily Carter, a waitress who had been serving at the restaurant for a while now. She was quiet, reserved, and didn't stand out in a room full of well-dressed, influential people. But there was something about her that James couldn't quite ignore. She walked by, balancing a tray of drinks, her movements graceful and efficient. James, who often found amusement in mocking those he deemed below him, decided to test her. "I bet you don't know a thing about investing," he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he glanced up from his phone, his lips curling into a smirk. "If you could give me one piece of advice, I'd listen." Emily paused, her pen hovering over her notepad. She looked at him for a moment, her expression calm but alert. "If you really want to invest wisely," she said, her voice steady, "you should put 40% into emerging market ETFs focused on sustainable energy. The rest should go into undervalued mid-cap stocks and some municipal bonds for the tax advantages." The smirk on James' face froze. His eyes narrowed as he set down his phone. The way she spoke, the precision of her words, it wasn't what he expected from a waitress. "That's surprisingly specific," he said, his voice laced with skepticism. "Did you memorize that from somewhere?" Emily didn't flinch. "No, sir. I just have an opinion on the market, and I've been following it." "For a while," she replied, her gaze unwavering. James was taken aback. Here was a waitress, someone who spent her days serving coffee and clearing plates, giving him investment advice that was not only detailed but thoughtful. He leaned forward, curiosity piqued. "Explain the emerging market rationale," he said, eager to hear more. Emily glanced around, as if weighing the situation. "I have customers waiting," she said, turning slightly as she reached for her tray. "But I'll make it quick. Western markets are oversaturated with green investments, which has led to a bubble. Emerging markets, on the other hand, offer better growth opportunities, especially in energy sectors where the infrastructure is still developing." James blinked. He was used to hearing such insights from financial analysts, not waitresses. "Who are you?" he asked, genuinely intrigued. "Just a waitress with an interest in finance," Emily replied with a slight smile. As she walked away to attend to other tables, James found himself watching her, his mind racing. He'd been in the business world long enough to know when someone had real knowledge. And Emily, despite her humble position, had just shown him a level of financial expertise he hadn't expected. As he sat there, contemplating, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just encountered someone far more significant than he had first assumed. As the night progressed, James Anderson couldn't shake the conversation he had with Emily. Every time he tried to focus on his work, his mind kept drifting back to her. A waitress, of all people, had just made a suggestion that made him reconsider his own financial strategies. His team of Ivy League graduates could barely explain the intricacies of emerging markets with such clarity and conviction. Yet, here was a young woman in a simple uniform, offering him insights that had the power to change the course of his investment strategy. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent his career building an empire, commanding boardrooms, and leading high-level negotiations. But Emily had just brought him face-to-face with something he hadn't expected: humility. As he sat there, staring at his phone, he found himself doing something he rarely did, questioning his own decisions. How could she know all this, he thought. The more he reflected, the more he realized there was something more to Emily than met the eye. She didn't just possess knowledge, she had insight. And that was a rare quality. As the evening came to a close, he found himself wondering if he could have made a different choice, if he could have taken a different path in life. Maybe that's why he couldn't let go of her. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had something real to offer. And that was the kind of person he hadn't encountered in a long time. His thoughts were interrupted when Emily returned with his check. She set it down in front of him, her usual polite smile in place. This time, however, James noticed something different in her. A quiet confidence that hadn't been there earlier. "It's a big tip, Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice even, but with a slight edge to it. "I'm sure you didn't mean it as a bribe." James looked at the check and then at her. For a moment, he thought about how easy it would have been to just play along, to stay in his comfort zone, to keep things transactional. But that wasn't why he was still thinking about her. "It's not a bribe," he said slowly, meeting her gaze. "It's for your advice. I've got to say, I didn't expect you to know so much." Emily tilted her head slightly, as if processing his words. She didn't say anything, but her eyes told him everything. She didn't want his money. She didn't need his validation. And that made her even more intriguing. As he stood up, he slipped his card into the checkbook and handed it back to her. "I'm serious about this. Let's talk more." Emily hesitated, glancing down at the card, then back up at him. For a split second, James saw something in her expression, a flicker of doubt, maybe even fear. But then it was gone, replaced by the same calm professionalism she had shown all night. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," she said quietly, her tone polite but firm. "I think you'll find that I'm just a waitress." James smirked slightly, a knowing look in his eyes. "I think you're selling yourself short." He didn't press her further, sensing that she wasn't quite ready to let him into her world. But that didn't stop him from making a mental note to follow up. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Emily than anyone, including her, realized. And, for the first time in a long while, James found himself genuinely curious about someone who wasn't chasing after his money. As he walked out of the restaurant, he couldn't help but think about how the night had turned out. A simple conversation had turned into something far more significant than he'd anticipated. He had come here to focus on business, but he was leaving with something else on his mind. Something that was more important than any deal. He needed to understand why Emily had that effect on him. And he would. He would find a way to know her better. The next day, James couldn't stop thinking about Emily. He had spent the entire morning on calls, discussing potential mergers, but his mind kept drifting back to the waitress he had encountered the night before. There was something about her, something that lingered. He was used to people wanting something from him, especially women. They either wanted his wealth or his influence, but Emily had been different. She hadn't asked for anything. In fact, she'd barely even acknowledged the tip he left her. She was unfazed by his money, and that intrigued him more than anything. By noon, he was sitting at his desk in his sleek office at Anderson Capital, but his focus was elsewhere. He stared out at the city skyline, his mind racing with questions. Who was Emily Carter? Why did she have that effect on him? Why was he so determined to learn more about her? He didn't like being caught off guard, and Emily had done just that. For the first time in years, he felt like he was in uncharted territory. At 2 p.m., as if the universe had conspired to bring them back together, he received a notification. It was from his assistant. A reservation for tonight at La Belle Époque. Table for one. Christina Matthews. His heart skipped a beat. Emily. His thoughts were interrupted as his assistant entered the room. "Mr. Anderson, I have a meeting scheduled for 4 p.m. with the Westbrook Group." He waved her off absent-mindedly. "Cancel it. I have something else I need to do." He quickly stood up and grabbed his coat. No more hesitation. He was going to see Emily again. He wasn't sure what he would say or what would happen, but he knew he had to do it. As he walked out of his office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. Something about Emily had stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. At La Belle Époque, the hostess greeted him with a knowing smile. "Mr. Anderson, we have your table ready." He nodded, following her through the restaurant, his eyes scanning the room. Then he saw her. Emily was standing by the bar, talking to another customer, her back to him. She was wearing the same black vest and white shirt, but there was a quiet grace about her that made her stand out among the others. She didn't see him approach, but as he got closer, she turned, her eyes meeting his for the first time since their last encounter. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Emily didn't smile, but her expression softened slightly, and James could see a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice cool but polite. "What brings you back?" "I came to talk," he replied, his tone steady but with a hint of uncertainty. She raised an eyebrow, as if questioning his intentions. Talk about what? He hesitated, then took a deep breath. About yesterday. About your advice. Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced down at the menu in front of her, clearly trying to maintain her composure. I don't think I have anything else to add, she said quietly. James studied her for a moment. She wasn't making this easy for him, but he wasn't going to give up. I think you do, he said. I think you have a lot more to offer than you realize. Emily met his gaze then, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. She found none. She looked away, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. I'm not interested in playing games, Mr. Anderson, she said, her voice firm. I'm just here to do my job. And what if your job could be something else? He asked, his voice softer now. Emily shook her head, clearly uncomfortable with where this conversation was going. I'm not looking for a job change, Mr. Anderson. I'm not offering you one, James said quickly. I just want to understand why you're so different. Emily stood up then, her face unreadable. I'm just a waitress, she said, her voice flat. Nothing more, nothing less. James watched her walk away, the finality in her words hanging in the air. As he sat back down, he realized she had walked away not out of indifference, but because she was trying to protect herself. And that was something he understood. For the rest of the evening, James couldn't shake the feeling that he had just taken a step back from something important. He couldn't let it go. He had to find out what was behind that wall Emily had put up. He knew that now more than ever, he had to keep pursuing the truth. And he wasn't about to let her go that easily. The next few days passed in a blur for James. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily and their brief, yet intense, interaction. The way she had looked at him, the way she had dismissed his offer without hesitation. It all lingered in his mind. He had dealt with countless people, all of them eager to please, eager to benefit from his wealth and influence. But Emily was different. She wasn't interested in his money. She wasn't interested in his status. And that was exactly what made her stand out. James found himself unable to focus on the usual tasks. Meetings with investors felt meaningless, and his negotiations with partners lost their urgency. The world outside seemed less significant now that he couldn't shake the image of Emily. He had been successful in everything he had done. He had built a business empire from the ground up, earned the respect of the most powerful people, and yet, in that one brief moment with Emily, he had felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a challenge. It wasn't just that she had knowledge, it was the way she held herself, the way she remained calm and composed despite the power dynamics at play. James was used to being the one who commanded attention, who held all the cards, but with Emily, he felt like he was the one being tested. He knew he had to see her again. He couldn't just let this go. But this time, he would approach things differently. He would approach her with respect, not with the expectation that she would be impressed by his wealth. It wasn't about money or status. It was about understanding her, and perhaps, understanding himself in the process. By the end of the week, James found himself back at La Belle Époque, sitting at a table near the bar. He had no reservation this time, but he had asked for Emily specifically. When she entered the room, he noticed the familiar look of professionalism on her face. But this time, there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes when she saw him. She didn't approach right away, and James wondered if she was still unsure of him, still hesitant after their last interaction. But he didn't mind. He respected her boundaries. Finally, she walked over, and for the first time, there was no mockery in his tone. Emily, he said, his voice genuine. I wanted to apologize for how I acted last time. I was out of line. She raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by his apology. Mr. Anderson, she started, but James interrupted her. Please, call me James. I know I probably don't deserve your time, but I would really like to have a conversation with you. There was a long pause as she considered his words. About what? She asked, still cautious. About everything, he said, leaning forward slightly. About you, about me, about how we got to this point. Emily studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. She didn't immediately respond. James sat back, giving her the space to decide. After a few moments, she spoke. I'm not interested in small talk, James. If you want to talk, you're going to have to be real with me. James smiled slightly. I wouldn't have it any other way. She nodded, then took a seat across from him. The air between them felt different now, less charged with tension, but more charged with curiosity. James felt a sense of relief, like they were finally going to have an honest conversation. "I don't expect anything from you," he said. "I just want to understand why you think differently from everyone else I know. You see the world in a way that no one else does, and that's why I keep thinking about you." Emily looked at him, her gaze softening slightly. "I don't think you're used to hearing that, are you?" James shook his head, chuckling softly. "No, I'm not. But I think it's time I started listening." Emily smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen from her. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a sign that perhaps they were on the same page now. The next few moments passed in silence, but it was comfortable. Neither of them spoke for a while, but the conversation was starting to feel like it was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, James found himself visiting La Belle Époque more often. He wasn't just coming for the business deals or the power lunches. He was coming to see Emily. It wasn't a romantic obsession, not yet, at least. It was something deeper, something that had to do with respect, with understanding, with wanting to learn from someone who saw the world in a way he couldn't quite grasp. Emily, on the other hand, was trying her best to remain distant. Every time James walked into the restaurant, a part of her wanted to ignore him. She had learned long ago that people like him, the powerful, the wealthy, the influential, rarely saw her as anything more than a servant. But James had proven to be different. The more they talked, the more she realized that there was something human about him. He wasn't the man he appeared to be in the boardrooms and conferences. There was a vulnerability to him, a curiosity about the world that intrigued her. One evening, James sat at his usual table. It was almost closing time, and the restaurant was quieter than usual. Emily was just finishing with her last set of customers, wiping down a table near the window. James watched her for a moment, her graceful movements as she worked, the way she held herself with quiet confidence. This time, he didn't wait for her to approach. He stood up and walked over to her. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I think it's time we have that conversation." She stopped wiping the table and looked up at him, her expression guarded. "What conversation?" she asked, not sure if she was ready for the depth of what he might say. "The one about why you keep pushing me away," he said, his gaze steady, not pleading, but asking for understanding. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had come, she wasn't sure how to respond. She had spent so much of her life keeping people at arm's length, shielding herself from the disappointment of being let down. But with James, it was different. "I'm not pushing you away," she said slowly, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I'm just trying to protect myself." James nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I get that," he said. "But sometimes, in order to protect ourselves, we build walls that keep everyone out, even the ones who are worth letting in." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. His words hit a nerve, but she wasn't ready to let him in yet. "I don't know if I can do that," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been on my own for so long, relying only on myself. I don't know how to trust anyone." James took a step closer, his voice softer now. "You don't have to trust me right away, Emily. But I want you to know that I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to listen, to understand." Emily looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was honesty. She took a deep breath and stepped back slightly. "I don't know how to let someone in," she said, her voice barely audible. James reached out then, gently touching her arm. "It's okay," he said. "I'm not asking you to change everything overnight. Just take a chance. Let's start by talking, really talking." There was a long pause as Emily considered his words. She had always kept her emotions buried, always kept her heart protected. But something about James made her want to open up, to take that risk. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll talk." James smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you," he said. And for the first time, Emily felt a sense of relief. She didn't know where this would go, but she knew that, at least for now, it was a step in the right direction. The following week, James continued to visit La Belle Époque, but now, it wasn't just about the business deals or the meetings. He had genuinely started looking forward to his conversations with Emily. They had started talking more often, during the lulls between her shifts or after the restaurant had closed for the night. And with each conversation, James felt something he hadn't expected, a growing respect, not just for her knowledge, but for her as a person. Emily, on the other hand, was beginning to feel. a shift in herself as well. She had always been guarded, keeping her distance from others, especially men like James. She had her reasons for not getting close to anyone. Life had taught her that vulnerability was a risk, one that often led to disappointment. But with James, it felt different. There was a certain honesty about him, a kind of transparency she hadn't encountered before. He wasn't like the other powerful men who came to the restaurant. He didn't treat her like she was invisible, and he certainly didn't look down on her. And despite herself, Emily found herself opening up to him, slowly but surely. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Emily found herself sitting across from James in a quiet corner of the restaurant. The place was nearly empty, save for a few late-night diners. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. James looked at her, slightly confused. "Do what?" he asked. "All of this. The business, the pressure, the constant expectations," she said, gesturing around the empty restaurant. "How do you handle it?" James leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered her question. "It's not easy," he said after a moment. "But I've learned to compartmentalize. You focus on what matters, and you let the rest go." Emily nodded, understanding. "That's what I've had to do too," she said. "Focus on the small stuff, the day-to-day. I used to have big dreams, but life doesn't always turn out the way you think it will." James could hear the hint of regret in her voice, but he didn't press her. He knew that she wasn't ready to talk about it, and he respected that. Instead, he decided to share something with her. "You know," he began, "I didn't always want to be a CEO. When I was younger, I thought I'd be a writer or something creative. But life has a way of pushing you into things you didn't plan for." Emily looked at him, surprised. "Really?" she asked. "You? A writer?" James chuckled, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I know. Hard to believe, right? But sometimes, I wonder what my life would have been like if I had followed that dream. It's easy to get caught up in the success, in the numbers, but at the end of the day, I think we all just want to feel like we matter, like we're doing something that counts." Emily was quiet for a moment, processing his words. For the first time, she saw James in a new light, not just as a powerful CEO, but as a person who had struggled, who had questioned his choices, just like everyone else. "I think you matter," she said softly. James looked at her, his expression softening. "Thanks," he said quietly, the sincerity in his voice making her heart skip a beat. The moment stretched between them, filled with an unspoken understanding. Neither of them said anything for a while, but the silence was comfortable, not awkward. James was about to speak again when the sound of the door opening interrupted them. A few more patrons had entered the restaurant, signaling the end of their quiet moment. Emily stood up, brushing off her apron. "I have to get back to work," she said, giving him a small smile. "But I'll see you soon, right?" James nodded, a smile tugging at his own lips. "I'll be back." And with that, she walked away, leaving him sitting there, a strange warmth filling his chest. As he watched her disappear into the hustle of the restaurant, he realized that he didn't just want to know more about her. He wanted to be part of her life, in whatever way that might look. He wasn't sure where things were headed, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to take the risk. Over the next few days, James couldn't get Emily out of his mind. It wasn't just her knowledge or the way she saw the world differently. It was the way she had made him feel. For the first time in years, he was genuinely questioning his own motivations and choices. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by people who either wanted something from him or feared him. Emily, however, seemed to be the only person who didn't fall into either category. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or his position, and that was both refreshing and unnerving. As he sat in his office, staring out at the city, James realized that his fascination with Emily wasn't just intellectual. He was drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. She had a quiet strength about her, a resilience that he admired. He knew he needed to see her again, but this time, he wanted to approach it differently. He wasn't going to make the same mistakes he had with other women. He wasn't going to treat her like an object of curiosity. He genuinely wanted to understand her. That evening, he found himself at La Belle Époque once again. The restaurant was busier than usual, but when he spotted Emily, his heart skipped a beat. She was standing behind the bar, talking to a customer with the same calm professionalism she always exuded. But when their eyes met, there was something different in her gaze, a recognition, perhaps, or a quiet understanding. She excused herself from the conversation and walked over to him. James, she said, her voice steady but with a hint of surprise. I didn't expect to see you here tonight. I was hoping to talk, he said, his tone sincere. About everything. Emily raised an eyebrow, but she didn't immediately retreat. Everything, she repeated, her voice cautious but not unkind. Yes, James replied. About why we've been circling around each other for so long. I think it's time we stop pretending we don't want to know more. She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing her options. For a brief second, he saw her hesitate, saw the walls she had built around herself flicker, almost like they might come down. But then, just as quickly, they were back up. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said softly, looking away. James felt a pang in his chest, but he didn't push. He knew better than to force someone to open up. Instead, he gave her the space she needed. I understand, he said quietly. I'm not here to rush you. I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Emily met his gaze again, and this time, there was something different in her eyes, a hint of vulnerability, mixed with a spark of curiosity. I don't know how this is going to go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm willing to try. James smiled, the weight of the moment settling between them. For the first time, it felt like they were both on the same page, like they were no longer just two people passing in the night. They were starting something new, something real. And that was enough for him. As they continued to talk, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. The noise of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the bustling of the kitchen, all of it became background noise to the conversation they were having. It was just the two of them, sitting across from each other, beginning to unravel the layers that had kept them apart. By the time Emily's shift was over, James felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew there were still things about Emily that she hadn't shared. But for the first time, he felt like they were heading in the right direction. As she walked away to change out of her uniform, James couldn't help but smile. There was something about her that made him believe in possibilities again, something that made him want to take a chance. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to do just that. The days that followed were filled with anticipation. James had never been one to wait, but with Emily, he felt something different, something that made him pause and allow things to unfold at their own pace. Emily had agreed to meet him again, but she had been clear that she wasn't ready to rush into anything. And he respected that. He found himself more patient than he had ever been, savoring each moment they spent talking, each word they shared, knowing that this was something real. It had been a week since their last conversation, and as James sat at his desk, going over the latest figures from his company, his mind kept drifting back to her. He couldn't focus on the spreadsheets, couldn't think about the acquisitions or the contracts. His thoughts were with Emily. What was she thinking? What was she feeling? He needed to know. It wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't just about the thrill of a new challenge. It was about her. He had learned more about her in the past few weeks than he had about any business partner in years. She was smart, independent, and driven, but also kind, caring, and deeply protective of herself. It was the way she had guarded her heart that intrigued him the most. It wasn't something he was used to. People in his world were either too eager to please or too afraid to speak their minds. Emily was different. She wasn't afraid to speak the truth, even when it made things uncomfortable. And that was what he admired most about her. That evening, after his last meeting had wrapped up, James found himself once again at La Belle Époque. It was quiet now, the dinner rush over, and the ambience had shifted to a softer, more relaxed tone. Emily was finishing her shift, her movements fluid as she cleaned up the bar. He watched her for a moment, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the restaurant's lighting. There was a quiet confidence about her that made his heart race. He stood up, walking toward her with purpose. As he approached, she looked up, a slight surprise in her eyes, but she didn't pull away. She just waited. Emily, James said, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of something deeper. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. She raised an eyebrow, not saying anything. About being real. About not rushing into things. Emily nodded, her hands still wiping down the bar. I didn't say that to push you away, she said softly. I just want to make sure we're both clear on what this is. James paused for a moment, considering her words. And what is this, Emily? He asked, his voice low, sincere. Emily stopped what she was doing and turned to face him. I don't know yet, she said, her eyes meeting his. But I'm willing to find out. but not on anyone's terms, but our own. James nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. It was a simple answer, but it meant everything. It meant that they were both on the same page, and that was all he had ever wanted. I can live with that, he said, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. Emily smiled back, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. Good, she said, the tension between them easing. So what now? James took a step closer, his hand lightly resting on the bar. Now, we take it one day at a time, he said. And whatever happens, we figure it out together. The moment hung between them, comfortable and still, and for the first time, James felt like everything was falling into place. He wasn't sure what the future held, but with Emily, he felt ready to face it. They didn't need to have all the answers, not yet. But they had each other, and that was enough for now. Emily looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to protect herself. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of trust. Trust that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something worth fighting for. The weeks that followed brought a sense of ease between James and Emily that neither had anticipated. Their conversations had deepened, and their connection grew stronger with every passing day. Emily, once so guarded, had begun to let her walls down, piece by piece. James, for his part, had never felt more alive. He had spent years navigating the world of business, constantly striving for success, but with Emily, he found something he hadn't even realized he was missing, a sense of balance, a feeling of peace. One evening, as they sat in a quiet corner of the restaurant after Emily's shift, James couldn't help but notice how different things felt now. He wasn't just waiting for the next deal, the next acquisition, the next big move. For the first time in a long time, he was simply enjoying the moment. You know, he said, breaking the silence. I never thought I'd find myself here. Emily raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. Here? As in sitting in a restaurant, talking to a waitress, she asked, her voice teasing. James chuckled, shaking his head. No, I mean here with you. I never imagined that I'd be this content, I guess. Emily's smile softened. She had noticed the change in James, too. The man she had first met was a CEO, focused on power and success, but the man sitting across from her now seemed different, more human, more grounded. I think you're finally figuring it out, she said quietly. James met her gaze, his eyes serious. I don't know if I've figured it out, he said, his voice low. But I do know that I don't want to lose this. Lose us. Emily's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of letting someone in. But James wasn't like the others. He wasn't asking her to change who she was. He was accepting her, exactly as she was. You're not going to lose me, she said softly, the words feeling like a promise. There was a long pause, as if the weight of their conversation hung in the air. Then, James reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently placed it over hers. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Emily looked down at their intertwined fingers, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. I don't know what this is yet, she said, looking up at him, her voice uncertain. But I'm willing to see where it goes. James squeezed her hand, his smile soft and reassuring. That's all I'm asking for, he said. Just a chance to see where this goes. As they sat there, hands still intertwined, a sense of calm settled over both of them. For the first time, they were both willing to take the leap. They didn't need all the answers right away. They didn't need to define everything. They just needed to be in the moment, together. The world outside could wait. They had found something real, something worth holding on to. And that was enough for now. James stood up, offering her a hand to help her from her seat. I think we've had enough talking for tonight, he said with a grin. How about we go for a walk? Emily smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. I'd like that, she said, taking his hand. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, it was clear to both of them that this was only the beginning. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, they were both ready to face it, side by side.